Everyone. Sorry to disturb you. This is the main reason why most people come is to sort of catch up with friends and acquaintances. So there'll be plenty of time at the end as well. But no, lovely to see you all here tonight. It's a bit of a miserable night out, and you're worried that people will get the fires lit and just sit in front of the fire and watch the TV tonight. But clearly, you've resolved enough not to do that. So thank you very much for coming along. I don't think you're going to be disappointed. I think you're going to very much enjoy the talk tonight. The John Muir Trust clearly done many wonderful things and continues to do wonderful things across Scotland and wider in the UK. And we're going to hear about some of those activities, the origins of the trust, the activities that it's pursuing now, and future prospects and ambitions. So I'm delighted that Chief Executive of John Muir Trust, Balharry, has agreed to come through and be our speaker this evening. It's really great to have the opportunity to learn more about, as I said to you, the local trust-based technical group, and bring up the activities in many places for a lot of us. So it would be good to get below the surface, understand what the trust is about. And I know that there'll be a number of people in the audience who will remember David's father with a lot of affection as well. So I think that will be a nice continuity of activities now as well to just flow through from what your dad's been remembered for, all the things you've done, and what you're now doing in your own right. So without further ado, David, thank you very much. Thank you, mate, and thank you, David, for coming along tonight. I really like the expectations both in terms of content and challenge. Over the weekend, I was thinking about what I was said, and I was aware I was going to come and speak to probably one of the most important audiences that you could in Scotland. So I was nervous about that. So to pass the time, I went down to the workshop, and I had this idea that I would come tonight with an obsidian spearhead. And it was going to be a metaphor, because if you think about how you make a spearhead from obsidian, it takes lots of flakes and you chip away slowly to get the final shape. So not only do you get something that has energy pointing towards the tip, but you also realise that that energy is only possible because of all the chips that have been taken away from the hole over time. So where I stand today, yes, thanks to my father, thanks to my mother and so on, I say more about that. But it's also standing on the shoulders of a lot of people in this room in terms of what the trust is doing. So when we come to celebrate individuals, I think we need to bear in mind that it's a collective effort. So in the workshop, I didn't have an obsidian thing because I hadn't realised. I thought it was Etsy or bought it, and it was when I arrived at time coming from India. So the balls would arrive next week. So I thought, well, I still like my metaphor, so I'm going to make an oak spear. So this spearhead is made, so you see it's on the thing there. And I was saying to Mike that I quite like just to leave it here for the person that asks the most challenging question. So you then have a choice what to do with it. I'd like you to take it home rather than use it on me. Before you want to it, there's one other thing about the spear, which I won't cover later on, but it's worth giving you the heads up. And I'm going to show a quote from a book called The Other Side of Sword. It's a quote from Hugh McLennan, and it'll come up on the screen. You'll get a chance to read it. And it contrasts the feeling that you get being north of the 60th parallel in Canada with the feeling that you get when you're traveling in Highland Glen. Even thinking about it, I choke. It's so emotional for me, so I can't read it, or I apologise, and I ask you to read it. And I've been fortunate, as I know some of you have in this room, to experience both of those feelings. And the point that's being made is that when you are in the Arctic, the feeling that is there is that nobody has been there before you, that God alone. It's that sense of openness and wilderness. And when you're in a Highland glen, the sense that you get is that everybody who ever mattered is there with God. I've thought a lot about that, and I care passionately about all sides of the point that's being made. But I think one way to look at it is that the landscapes of the Highlands are the landscapes that you see in the runway systems and the dikes and so on. They're part of a farming landscape. They're a settled culture. When you look to the north in the Arctic, what you see is a landscape where there are nomadic people that have lived there for every bit as long, but their footprint on that landscape is far less. So in some ways, when we talk about wild places, we go back to the hunter-gatherer societies. And I'm going to theme that through the talk, and we'll come back to it at the end. So that's my last metaphor for the student. So in terms of themes, and I spent a little bit of time doing some introductions, as Mike said, and then talk a little bit very little about John Muir, the man himself, and draw contact with somebody else. And then I want to talk about four things. So one is what's happening globally with the environment and humanity's space in there. I want to talk about culture and our relationship with the land. I want to talk about choice. I was speaking to Mike there just before we started, and just saying that the best of us struggle to think greater than 2 generations ahead. Politicians are forced into a cycle of thinking about 5 years ahead. In the trust, we have an operational cycle that's 3 years ahead. So we're all, in terms of looking after the world, we're pushed into quite short-term thinking. And then the thing I want to try and convince you all is that I think we can do much better for the environment than we're doing just now. I think it's possible that we can, all the environmental bodies, those that are private landowners that are interested in the government bodies, could be working much more effectively together. And we're looking to try and find a way through that. And I'm going to give you some insight into what we're proposing and welcome challenge on it later. And hopefully have some discussion. So, John Muir. John Muir born in Scotland, left when he was about 10, 11, I think, in Balharry, went to America. And I guess everybody in the room is fairly familiar with the fact that John Muir was the founder of the national parks in America. A contemporary of John Muir's, roughly 27 years younger, was Gifford Pinchot. And Gifford set up the US Forest Service. In that context, they were contemporaries, they were friends for a while, they fell out very publicly in the press. There's a massive volume of literature that exists on the internet that talks about their 2 different philosophies. But what's interesting is that those 2, the tension between those 2 is exactly what we're dealing with today. And I think the point there is that what we in the trust believe, and I guess everybody in this room believes, it's not a matter of either or. It's there is space, even in the UK, even in Scotland, even in Britain or Spain, there is space to have both of those elements. One challenge would be, do you combine them so you have a happy medium and a mix of everything, or can you allow for there to be wild places, which I think might be later. So, introduced as I have been for most of my life as Vic's son. Like you said, I should have had to report, yeah, that's my father. But just to give credit to the rest of the family, and I would stay during the week with my mother. She was an amazing lady. I've got a sister and I've got 2 sons. I've lived a very outdoor lifestyle, as most of the people in this room have. I've had the pleasure of playing shinty. I've managed a few shinty games at all the ages, both junior, senior, and shinty. And I've got an interest through my sons in building wall cabins. So quite a diverse background, but as a person, I spent most of my time working for government bodies. technical issues for Sandwood. So in terms of other things that have shaped the person I am, I'm fortunate when I was young to go and do Eagle Eye service with my father. Spent a lot of my youth fishing on the rocks or climbing mountains or whatever. And I think when you see something like this, which I guess is familiar to most people, it's a hang. And it's a hang standing there itself in, let's say, February, March time of year. And if you look at the landscape that that hang standing in, there's very little feeder shelter. And that's fairly standard for large parts of the Northwest Island. The hard bit of this story is that that hang is hours, minutes away from dying starvation. So the reason I'm starting looking at it is it can't run away because it's come through a hard winter. Now, potentially very emotive because you could say that's a welfare issue, and I totally get that. But you could also say that, well, lots of animals, wild animals die, natural deaths, and it's not pleasant, it's just part of life. The challenge is, though, that if you see deer as a wild animal, then nobody's got responsibility for their starvation in the wintertime. If you see that deer are managed, then somebody has responsibility, but the reality is that in law, you can't hold them responsible. When they claim management, you can't hold them responsible. So the only point I'm making here is that if we've got a Scotland as a iconic animal and we want to look after it, one of the things the Trust is doing with properties and stands for is obviously the protection of those groups. And with that comes the right habitat, the food and the shelter for those deer. And I won't go into everything that shaped my life, but those images and those moments are hugely powerful. That led on to, basically I went to university, I studied, I joined it was at the time Nature Conservancy Council, it's embarked on the Scottish Wildcat, which you guys have taken forward in terms of the cairngorms, and then I got an opportunity to work at the time for the Deer Commission for Scotland, just at the time it was really set up. And that led, and a lot of people in the room will also know, to the first regulatory action that was taken, and that took place in the session. And you can see the consequences and the benefits of that today. The long story going back in terms of the detail. A small factoid that people may not be aware of is I actually worked in the private sector for the previous owner before I worked for the Deer Commission. Another part, I think, which will come through in some of these the slides to come, is that in the earlier one you saw a picture of me standing with the Lost Boys in terms of route worship. So when we took action in Glenfeshie, it was with people that we went to school with and played shoot with. So to do that to people that you hold in the highest regard because of their job is quite challenging. But sometimes you have to make those choices and you have to drive them to get the change that you need. One of the really good things that came out of Glenfeshie, not only in terms of habitat response, but was the Deer Commission were called out for not following best practice. And what that led to was a discussion as to, well, who owns the knowledge on best practice? Who owns it? Is there such a thing that we can see as best practice? And we couldn't. Everybody had a different way of developing, everybody had a different way of doing absolutely everything. Why our safety wasn't written down, hygiene wasn't written down, so many things that people felt strongly about, but there wasn't an agreement on how to move it forward. So again, taking the analogy of the point of the spear, it wasn't for the Deer Commission to lead that. I initiated it, chaired it for a while, but the bottom line is that the best practice that came out of it was agreed by the industry, and many people contributed to the the writing and the preparation of all the guides that are in that. Now that best practice guide for peer management in Scotland then was taken forward into the UK and is now used in some countries in Europe, simply because the collective voice said this is something that we agree that we need to sort out and have a single voice of what best practice is for peer management. The reason I'm spending time on this is that I would like to do the same with a group of people with the best minds in Spain, the best minds in Scotland, in the UK, and within Europe, to prepare something similar but for wild places. And I'll say more about that. The other part is worth mentioning probably is I spent 6 years working in the Crofton Commission. And for those of you who know, Crofton is a piece of land surrounded by red tape. The man in the foreground who walking towards the camera is called Kennedy. He was eventually the chair of the Crofton Commission during the time that I worked there. And what's at play here, you can guess by the body language of the people in the picture, is a boundary dispute. Crofton is full of boundary disputes. And while in a sense that's a caricature of Crofton, the bit that's really important here is that the Crofters are simply defending a property right. And let's say more about property rights. So if you think about my career, I worked time in the Deer Commission, which was a regulatory body taking action to protect the public right, and in the Crofton Commission, which was looking after Crofters' rights. I want to just talk briefly about some books that have been a massive influence on me and to people. So, I am an ecologist of training, and I am a child of Richard Dawkins, if you like. So the selfish gene is, there are principles in there that I subscribe to, or I see recurring in many themes in terms of human behaviour. And I too am a product of that personally. I behave in a way that I challenge myself, and I say, that's in nobody else's interest but your own. The next one is the other side of sorrow, Jim Hunter. Jim's written a number of books. For those of you that are interested, I recommend reading all of them. Other side of sorrow is very powerful. What it argues is that the coming of the SSSI system in Scotland completely disempowered a lot of people in the Highlands from looking after their land. And that disempowerment has had a knock-on effect that we see today. And part of what the Trust holds really here is that we do need to protect our places, which I will come on to the fact, but we need to do so by empowering the people who live and stay in these areas. Next one is Robert Andrews' book, The Territorial Imperative, which is really interesting. And at the core of that book just lies a very simple concept, which is that human societies, in order to exist, need to push against a perceived common enemy. And there are lots of examples of that. So if you look at murder rates in the UK, most murders take place within families to a person that's known to you. But if you were to attack that family, they would coalesce to defend themselves against you. Same with the Berlin Wall coming down, just at a completely different scale. So Robert Andrews' book, although it's 1954, thereabouts, it's much quoted in literature through the years because of that basic premise. Tom Bingham's has talked about the rule of law. Property right is the basis on which the Western world's law works. If it wasn't for understanding the property right, private property right, our laws wouldn't work. So everything that we do, all our legal institutions, are about protecting private property rights. And again, I'm going to say more about it, but that might be important. I'm always speaking to Hannah Ritchie yet, so I'll talk about her a lot later on. And then Ben Ansell's youth lecture. How many people in here listen to youth lectures? There's a few listeners there. I mean, absolutely fascinating source of information. In the 23, Ben Ansell was giving his talking about democracies. I just made the point that the world's governed by anarchy, which I hadn't thought about, but I'll say more about that and why that's difficult for the future of the planet. And the final person I'd like to give credit to is a guy in Potter. That's Chris Keeble. Chris Keeble was a colonel in the paratroopers at the time of the Falkland War. John Muir Trust was set up to ban Neuter at the time that the Falkland War was getting going, and this is the bombing range. And there was a debate as to whether they would use Neuter as that bombing range, and the Trust and the founding members of the Trust interceded in use of very influential people, such that the Trust managed to buy it. Chris Keeble was the guy in Goose Green who took over from the guy, Jones, who got the Victoria Cross for his bravery. And he then went on to get the Argentinians to surrender on Mount Pleasant. And in doing that, he had to bury, as I recall, 16 of his troops. And having spent so long with them in that process of the Argentinian surrender and burying those that he had trained to be good soldiers, he realised that the futility of war and tried to put his services to much better use. And he became a trainer in leadership skills. And I had the privilege of spending a few days with Chris. And I haven't met many people in the military backgrounds with Chris's type of experience. But as a person who's used firearms all my life, the idea of asking anybody to move into incoming fire is completely paralyzing. I just can't see how you can get people to do that. Chris had that ability. And the comment that he encouraged me to think about in my career was to completely have the courage of the conviction. So if you believe and you're willing to believe, others will follow. If you hesitate and you don't speak with passion, then you will entertain and you'll never get people to follow. So hopefully some of Chris's teachings have paid off. This is the quote I can't bring myself to read. And I think that, I don't know why it's so poignant for me, but it is. I guess it's because growing up in the Highlands, you know lots of people. You're brought up in the story of the Highland clearances. You've seen the pain and the suffering and the discomfort that people go through. And then you do get that sense of Highland community that once was, but it's not there anymore. And that, and just in lots of ways, I kind of feel that quite viscerally. I've mentioned already, we as a charity own quite a lot of land. 50% of that land is crofted. This is on our croft land up at Sandwood. Crofters have the right to graze. We've got no rights to interfere with their grazing. This is cattle policy. Got the powder and just looking after the sheep. But again, the point is that even today, we've got people with calloused hands working on the land, doing what they've always done, because that's the opportunity that life threw. It's no different. I mentioned earlier that I've been fortunate enough to be up in the north of Baffin Island, and with people hunting in different ways. And here this is an evening when all we're coming today. And it's a nice traditional form of Indian hunting, and I won't go into the details of how that story played out. But it's just to remember, to remind ourselves that people have lived in these landscapes for a very long time. And then we go, does anybody want to hazard a guess as to what that's a picture of? Yeah, it's LiDAR. It's a picture from LiDAR. So looking at the Amazon basin, areas where they thought was pristine jungle. And they're now looking through the canopy and they're seeing that in those areas that was thought to be pristine jungle, there's actually signs of lost civilizations. And that's fascinating. But, that's an excellent. That's fascinating. That's no different to Scotland. You don't need LiDAR in Scotland to see that. We go to the West Coast, we will see the runways. So this is looking down on Strathair, on the Elbow Peninsula. Where you see the point of the rainbow is our farm at Strathair, and at the head of the loch there are standing stones. Those standing stones are estimated to be about 6,000 years old. If you go down to the coast, you can see just that wee bit of water that pokes in on your right hand side. There's a rock, an old rock much degraded from about 1400 BC. And if you look at the landscape for signs of man from 6,000 years ago to 14,000 BC, all the way through, that landscape has got so many signs and memories of people that have lived there. And that sets up the challenge as to, well, what do we mean when we start talking about wild places? What does it mean? Is that a wild place to somebody? If you stay in Elbow all your life, that's not a wild place, that's your farm. So perspective is very important. There's another example. This is sort of on Barnesdale Bay, looking across at the lee face on Northern. That's property again that we own. Cherished because it was one of the first properties that we bought, and we look after, and we're trying to do the best. But that line that you can see across the middle of the face is a fence. It's a scar left by man that creates a habitat difference above and below the fence. And very crudely speaking, if you want heather on a hillside, you'll need deer below 15 deer per square kilometre. If you want the linear grass, you'll need deer of about 25 deer per square kilometre. The green area above the fence is mainly the linear grass. So in a sense, that tells you instantly, without any much knowledge at all, you can tell the differential grazing pressure of deer just from the habitat colour in the image. The aspiration of the Trust very much is that fence has got a lifetime of another 5 years, and we'd really like to take the fence off. And already, because of the deer reductions that we've been doing over the last few years, you can see the heather above the fence starting to come back in. The other part, though, and again, just speaks to the crop development, is that this is on the side of Wally, is that a lot of our land is common grazing. And while there might not be remnants and features left by man, it's still a grazing right for the crofters to use that land. And we have to be sensitive to that. Not because it's cultural, but because it is a legal right that they fought hard for and is there. So that's the context setting. And I want to talk about some of the global perspective. So there's this fancy word called the Anthropocene, and I think that's about the best diagram I can get to explain it. So basically humans have lived on the planet for a very long time, and then we've now come into an age where although historically we lived here for a long time, we had no impact. Now we are having an impact in lots of different ways, and that's quite new. And if you bear with me, I'm going to share some. Yeah, let's show some too. So I know it's mesmerisingly big. I'm going to speak to you about space and the universe. And the only way I can do it is that I could never really get my head around this. I couldn't even understand the difference between universes and solar systems and galaxies and all those words until I found this helpful way in, which is that if you were to travel at the speed of light, it takes 8 minutes to get to the sun. The sun's quite far away. And then, in terms of how big our solar system is, that is 1.5 light years. That's the size of our solar system, 1.5 light years across. Our galaxy that we're in is 100,000 light years across. The universe is 94 billion light years across. The scales are mind-blowing. The bit that's interesting is that we are the only known life in that. We're the only known life. And we're on this ball spinning in space. And you would think if we could wake up to how unique and precious that is, we might behave slightly differently. But there's reasons why that's very challenging. And I'm going to speak more about those. So, back to the Anthropocene. I'm not going to show you lots of slides about how man is changing the globe at a global level. I'm just going to show you what's happening in Scotland. So, 1970s, deep ploughing of peat. That's all that shows. That's taken from our property up in Sandwood. We've got behind the iconic beach, if you like, there's lots of flow country, and at the moment it's got lots of deep ploughing. And some people might ask, why do we continue to try to manage cropland? Well, because there's lots of things we can do. There's a discussion going on with the croppers at the moment about blocking those deep drains to restore that habitat. And that's something that we can do in partnership, and it will be a win-win for both parties. That's the deep drains. Then you've got the breaking the crust, where the peat's not deep at all. And then once you've broken the crust, then whether it's wind and rain and frost and so on, it doesn't take long for that thin crust to disappear, and very hard to restore when you've got little peat to re-establish your cover with. And then we go to the Schedule D tax relief of the 1980s in the flow country and all the consequences of that. Now, as I go through this, bear in mind that I have been a civil servant or a public servant for most of my life. So I've worked for government, I've been party to the machine that creates these policies, and I'm willing to hold my hand up to say that many of the policies that have passed that government produced, and even those of today, are causing significant damage, but they're the best that we can get at the time. And I guess the people who came up with Schedule D tax relief thought it was a great idea. Again, this is the top of Lurban, looking down towards Barnesdale Bay. And it's the landscape that I showed you of the starving hive. There is very little by way of food and shelter there. Consequence of vast hedge payments paid on the more sheep that you could have on the ground, the more money you got, or from the legacies of Victorian sport and Europe. And then we come forward today, and we sort of see that many of our landscapes that we hold dear are now being given over to renewable energies. And our politicians will say, but we are going to decarbonise the economy. And that's great, that's why we're doing it, because we have to save the planet. And yes, those arguments go so far, but when you analyse and you dig down into the detail, you say, well, what contribution does the UK make to global carbon emissions? It's small, it's less than 1%. But yet, when we come to kind of decarbonising our economy, we're willing to sacrifice some of our best and most iconic areas. And that's a tension. I don't know, I honestly don't know where the rights and wrongs of that argument go. I just feel that in terms of being one of the leading countries in the Western world and decarbonising their economy, we should do so with leadership that shows that we can also look after some of our wild places. Because if all we've done is decarbonise the economy and we haven't left ourselves out of our places, have we succeeded? At the different end of the spectrum, there's something that's a wee bit more insidious. How many people in this room are climbers? So, I've done quite a lot of climbing. This map came to me as quite a shock. My sons are fairly in the climbing world as well. But this map is a sort of the red dots show what's called the sport climbing routes in Wester Ross. And a sport climbing route, for those of you that don't climb, is where somebody goes and drills the rock and puts in stainless steel bolts to make it safer for people to climb. I don't have an objection to that, and indeed I've done in this country and abroad, I've climbed and my life has been secured by those types of bolts. There are a couple of issues though. One is that nobody's asking the landowner's permission whether they can do that. Nobody's thinking about whether or not there's a golden eagle ivy just round the corner and the sudden presence of people climbing is disturbing that bird so that it doesn't use that nest site anymore. And then nobody's thinking about the cumulative effect of leaving these stainless steel bolts in the landscape. We recently got wind that somebody was planning doing this in Carouse, and they were going to bolt one of our faces. And you just thought, why? Why would you do that? And the person who was going to do it, I won't embarrass them by mentioning names, is a very famous top-end climber. But I guess the point is that they're just not thinking about what the long-term impact is to the wild place quality that we feel when we go there. And it's the same with building cairns. So cairns sometimes have a purpose, but lots of people like Andy Goldsworth type cairns, and if there's one cairn, they'll have their own cairn. And there's some parts, there's cairns everywhere. There's even stone seats in the tops of mountains. And it's not that people are meaning to do damage, it's just that they think it's okay to do it. And I guess what we need to do is to sort of try and find a way to help people measure the consequence of their actions and be accountable for it. There's no point going and arguing with somebody who's bigger, stronger than you and saying, I don't approve, who's got a black eye. So you've actually got to convince them that it might be better for them and everybody if they look after somebody's wild places better. Anyone hazard a guess what those images have in common?
Introduced species.
Yes, very good. These are all non-native species. Some are highly invasive, others not so much. And with the exception of the muntjac, I think we can say, and the grey squirrels. I'm not sure the grey squirrels. Certainly, exception of muntjac, we've got them all on our properties. And the Elbow Peninsula, in particular, is significantly challenged now with some of these invasive plants. And Noida is both, and Wolseley, I guess we're wrong. It's the cabbage, I want to say Gunner, it is Gunner. I get it mixed up with the disease sometimes. So, Gunner, and in the bottom there, you've got the Pontica with all the Indians. And again, the point I'm making is that some of the impacts on the landscape are towards visual impacts, but there's also impacts about how we, because of man's interaction, change habitats, and then we've also got this problem with invasive non-native species. And now I want to jump a little bit, and I talked about that, to how people make decisions. And AI is quite popular at the moment, where I sit on AI, but I'm going to suggest that it might be the key to saving the planet later on, so look out for that. But the curious thing I wanted to draw out in terms of human behaviour is that if you think about North Mountain Rescue, somebody's out there in atrocious conditions and they need, their life depends on people getting up the hill to save them. There's lots of people who just don't hesitate to get out there and will put their own lives at risk to save others. When there's flooding, as in Carlisle and Cumbria with Nevis storm, but massive flooding, everybody pulls to and sorts it out. It's the same with fire. It's a fire recently in Aviemore, or sewage outlets. When humans can see that there's a problem, they can understand the cause. We're not shy to put our own lives in there to try and solve it. The problem seems to exist when we come to this type of thinking, which is that it's called the shifting baseline syndrome. And when change is happening, and we know it's happening, we know it's recorded, and this is temperature, which I can explain in a minute. But you could look at it in the context of the marine environment, and you could say, look at fishing catches coming into ports. Go back 100 years, and you look at the quality of the catch and fish coming in, and you go, that's amazing. If you today you look at the quality of the catch coming in, and you go back 20 years, you go 20 years ago was amazing, and so on. So slowly, the expectation that we have of what our take is from the sea or what we accept as the global temperature, it shifts gradually. And because there is no action that we can take as individuals that will immediately address the problem, our collective action is kind of questionable. This is another interesting thing in terms of sort of some of the things that are going on. So remember at the start, I was talking about Bingham's book, Lord Bingham, in terms of the rule of law and how it's based on property rights. If we only govern the planet on property right, then The problem is that the environment's got nobody to argue for it. And the two red rings there are the two first countries that in their constitution have put a legal right for the environment. The other ones with the yellow rings are countries where elements of the country, rivers or geographic areas, have been given legal rights to protect them. Now, clearly humans can change the law at any time, but it is interesting that something's beginning to happen where rights in law are now being associated with non-property rights belonging to people. I mentioned in terms of listening to the Ben Ansell lectures, Ruth lectures, that he pointed out that the world is governed by anarchy. Now, definition that he uses of anarchy is that it's not that nobody's in control of something. It's like there is nobody in control of the whole. There's no single entity. There's no ability to make a decision and then to enforce that decision with the support of all the people in the world. And that means that this unique ball of life spinning in this vast universe is managed in an anarchic way. And again, usually that cannot be the solution to sustainable life long term on the planet. The two real challenges, if you want to think about how you could govern the globe, the ones that I would come up with anyway, are equity. So equity is really important not only at a global level, but also at a local level. I'm going to go back to the example of deer. I argue passionately for deer reduction in certain areas. And I speak to lots of people. And I speak to rooms full of people who have lived their lives second, third generation of deer stalkers. And I also socialise with those people on New Year's Eve and so on, with my friends. They understand the arguments that I'm making. Their tribe, if you like, will argue against them because of one thing. And that one thing is that I'm threatening their very existence. And I'm not meaning to, because that's the last thing I want to do. But the reality is that, again, there's this concept of Maslow's hierarchy of needs. People are aware of it. But some of the most basic human needs that you've got are food and shelter. And then you've got income to look after your family. So when you argue for changing a sector where people's income and their tithe houses are all linked to it, what they're thinking is, you're arguing at the top of it. You're looking for this thing called self-actualization and the greater good of everybody. They're listening to your argument going, it's all very well, but who's going to pay? Who's going to pay my salary, and where am I going to have a house if you succeed in your objective? And that point doesn't apply just to deer. That applies to the Northern Hemisphere versus the South. In so many ways, if you try to seek change in a room or in a country or a global situation where there's massive inequity of power, then it's going to be really difficult to enforce any decisions that you make. And a consequence of trying to enforce decisions on people is you go back to the tribalism thing. So Robert Adry's position is that if you threaten our tribe, we will defend ourselves against you, and you will form a tribe of people to face up to the argument. So a key point in my talk is that we're not going to make progress on some of these big issues facing the globe if we continue to try to knock heads together. We've got to find a solution that works for both sides of that coin. Now, in part, this is where I think AI comes in, because the selfish gene part of me says that humans do not have, and we can challenge this in the discussion later, but we do not have the ability to act in anything other than the interests of our family and our children and our grandchildren. We'll dress it up in all sorts of ways, but we are, in an evolutionary space, that's what we're adapted to do. And my other big statement is that no species ever, that I'm aware of as an ecologist, adapted to look after its habitat. So we are an animal, and I don't know of any animal that's ever done it. There are grey areas that we can talk about, but I think basically evolutionary biology tells us that we're not here to look after our habitat, we're here to look after our genes. AI has the ability to say, if you want to look after the planet in the long-term future of humanity, these are the decisions you need to take. If you don't want to take those decisions as politicians or whoever, just explain your logic. But if you want to know how to protect the planet, we probably collectively have enough information in the world just now to know how to do it. We just don't want to do it because politicians, it's not popular on politicians who are voted in on a 5-year cycle to make those difficult choices. Don't get too depressed because I have got suggestions to how you can get through. So before we get to that, I want to say just a little bit about John Muir Trust. So we look after, so we say we own, I don't think we own land, we just look after at the moment 250 square kilometres. 50% of that is on Skye. We've got other properties from Sandwood down to in Coventry we're also working on. We engage to inspire people because we want people to help us conserve and protect wild places. We advocate for the protection, and one of the things that the board and I are working on at the moment is that in advocating to protect, we're coming down to the understanding that this does need more legislation. Wild places are what's called a non-market benefit, and unless the public purse engages in looking after wild places, both through formal designation. Another weird factor, I spoke earlier about Jim Hunter and his commentary about the impact that the SSSI system had in terms of disenfranchising people in the Highlands. The fact of it is that our designation system, none of our designation systems in the UK protect natural processes. That's weird. What they protect is they protect features of interest. They protect landscape, but they don't protect the process side. They don't protect the freedom of nature to do what it wants to do. We don't celebrate that. And indeed, we're almost the opposite culturally at a UK level. We celebrate the fact that we're a man-made landscape. And all the purpose of the John Muir Trust is doing at the moment is just saying, is that the way we want it to be? Do we now live in an island where we've got no space for nature to be free, to do what it wants to do? This is probably the most tricky part, is that why does it matter? And it matters to me. One of the things about working for the John Muir Trust is that there is a habit, there's a tendency for people to quote John Muir. If you go into a wild place, this is how I feel, this is how you should feel. And since I was that high, I rebelled against all that. I just thought, how dare you tell me how I should feel when I go into a wild place? How dare you tell anybody how they should feel? I don't know where that comes from. But it's that when you experience a wild place, that's very personal to you. You might want to share. You might be in mourning. You might be in a space of extreme happiness. But that's very personal. And wild places do so many things for so many people in lots of different ways. And you'll never capture it in one phrase. That's where I come from. If the ecology side of me sort of says, but what would happen in a world where we know the planet's changing, but we don't know how it wants to respond to look after itself? So one of the initiatives of the Trust is something called the Carbon Exemption Land Tax. So it's called CELT. And it stems from just a recognition that in the past, the carbon dioxide levels on the planet have gone higher than they are today. And the planet responds, as an ecosystem, it is adapted to respond to high levels of carbon if you let it. The problem at the moment is that because of all the human activity, we're making choices that a golf course is better than trees, or 100 more other examples, like grouse moor is better than forest, or whatever. But what we're saying is that we don't want the land to capture carbon, or we, because of our other interests, are stopping the land capturing carbon. Those other interests are private interests. But in terms of the public interest, it's probably better that more carbon is captured just now. Otherwise, go back to the shifting baseline, we're all getting warmer. There's another part about having to find wild places yet, I'm getting to it. The Trust looks after land, so this is the sort of the small bit of flow country that we've got on our Sandwood estate. Classic flow country with its bogs. And then the other one is Coventry, Charterhouse, an area that we're looking at to take on as a wild place that's within the inner ring road of Coventry, in the city. And I don't think a lot of people would associate that property with something that the Trust does. But what we're coming to the recognition is that unless we get access to the urban masses and convince them that wild places and the freedom of nature really matters, we don't stand a chance of influencing politicians. So the opportunities in Charterhouse for a wild place relate to two things. One is it is within a social and a geographic context that is different to Sandwood. So when we talk about wild places, we're looking to have a register of the best wild places, the length and breadth of the UK, within what is possible, given a social and geographic context. And if that's in inner city Coventry, so be it. The chances are that tens of thousands of people will go there every year, as opposed to the hundreds of people that go to some of the properties in the north. Now, we're getting to sort of the nitty-gritty part of the talk, but there's lots of words that are being used in this space. So there's wild land, which we'll say a little bit about, and wild places. They are different. And it is, for the Trust, really important that we understand those differences. The Trust in its articles is all about the last one. It's all about wild places. Yes, we care deeply about wildland and the visual impacts on wildland, and we've fought fiercely to protect it. But what the charity is about more than that. It's about wild places, and it's about wild places across the whole of the UK. Now, when we speak about wild, we sort of think about all sorts of things. So, for me, it's like, how many people here go for a walk in an area where there are bears? Lots of people. How many people, put your hands up, how many people have encountered a bear? Right. As a person, right, I would be completely terrified. I wouldn't know what to do. I've never encountered a bear. I went to the Arctic, I took a shotgun with me. It had 5 different types of cartridges in the barrel. First one was flashbang and ended up with solid slug. And if a bear had come near me, I would take all my powers not to shoot it, because I would have been so scared. And I just express that because I live in an environment without bears. But I watch social media and I see a lady with her dog fighting off a bear to protect the bear, or somebody else with pepper spray. And I think, wow, it's just interesting how culturally I have been adjusted to living without bears. But when I think about bears, I think about this guy. And I think, holy hell, he's the last person I want to meet when I'm out for a walk. But then I challenge myself and I think, well, does that mean in order to enjoy, does my philosophy of being so terrified of bears go to the point of, don't like bears, just kill them, or kill all the bears, and then I'll be safe and go for a walk? And that is something in human psychology, is that in terms of what's wild, we want to tame it to the point that we're happy and comfortable with it. So back to the man-made landscape. So I personally wish I was better adjusted to bears, but if that was roaming around tonight, I would struggle to get to the car. But if you look at the other things that's happening with wild, this is what the marketplace looks like. Everything is wild just now. You've got wild fashion, wild perfume, wild this, wild that, wild coffee, wild, everything is wild. So in terms of what we understand now, and not people in this room, but what the general population in the UK thinks about wild is probably quite different to what we're advocating for. So our language has been stolen to lower the bar to create commercial opportunities for something that is perceived as good, but yet undefined. So our definition of wild places is simply where natural processes and natural landscapes thrive. So there's a visual component and there's an ecological component. again, I just want to hammer home this thing about the numbers of people. This is a graph that I invented. It is factually nonsense. So let's just look at it as an in theory principle graph. It is good to get outdoors, and lots of people get outdoors. It's even better if you can get to a green park in an inner city area. It's even better if you get to one of our designated sites, maybe a national park, maybe a national scenic area, or whatever. But the number of people proportionately in the UK that get access to the best wild places is very small. And that makes me think, is this just an elitist argument? Are we arguing for something that actually doesn't matter to the majority? Personally, I don't agree with that, but it's worth throwing it out. Wild places are threatened. This is a curious skyline. That's the Cunard skyline, just taken from the bends before you drop down towards, if you go the skier down towards Kellaskew. It looks like a sleeping person, caught with that light that time of day. But wild places have threats. So whether it's economics or infrastructure in terms of the renewable energy we talked about, it's constant attrition that's going on. We were speaking about footpaths earlier, and the number of footpaths that are appearing and getting manicured and so on. On one hand, you could say there's a proliferation, and there's more and more. On the other hand, you could say, but maybe that's good, because if you manage access well, then more people can enjoy the environment. And I've spoken about the other things. Key point here is that the biggest threat is the absence of protection. So when we talk about a wild place, and we have to try and define it, which we can't yet, we've got what would be its component parts. So there's something about nature, something about the freedom of nature to thrive, to do what it wants. There's something about the ecological integrity. There's something about visual impacts. There's something about sound. I was camping over New Year in Neudert, and it was quite interesting there to see what impacted my experience of a wild place. I was by myself and looked up at the sky, and I could see the vapor trails of the aircraft going across from Heathrow to North America. So visually, it's not as well. At night, there was house lights on in Armsdale, so I could see those. So sound and light have impact on our experience in the wild places. And then there's the remoteness and accessibility. And remoteness and accessibility, remoteness from man-made structures, is at the core of the wild land concept. But in terms of wild places, there are many other components to what makes a wild place. So what the Trust is looking to do now is to try and work in the same way that we did with the best practice guides for deer, but to work with a coalition of partners all the way to the IUCN level to come up with an objective measure for measuring wild places. Now, the benefits of that will that we will be able to highlight threats and pressures. We'll be able to discuss in a more informed way what human intervention should or shouldn't be in natural processes. We aim to build support for it's not a huge change, it's not dramatic, it's just saying, can we tweak our designation system to give the choice if people in the UK want to celebrate nature's freedom? That's all they ask us. And then the final one is the international application. I'll say a wee bit more about links to IUCN. So I want to go back now to wild land just for a second. These maps are fairly self-explanatory. If you look at where people live in the UK, you get a heat map for the left-hand side. If you look at where our best wildland areas are, you get the blue areas on the right-hand side. And it is no shit, Sherlock. That is just, basically our wildland is almost just what we've left, what we haven't managed to use. Now the question then is that at a UK level, when we talk about protecting wild places, are we willing to accept that our arguments have been backed into the corners of the Northwest? The Trust would say no, absolutely not. If you were to ask the IUCN at the moment how it rates the designation systems in the UK, if you look at that map on the left, only the areas in purple, according to that map, meet category 1A. As somebody that knows the purple areas very well, I'd say they don't even meet category 1A, but that's a different point. The point is that there are very few areas internationally recognised as meeting the highest classification ICN of looking after wild places. And that again, I don't know if that's shocking, it's a choice. It's just that we have choices. Do we want that to be the case, or would we like to see more areas? Where the trust is going is to say, well, the biogeography of the UK is not all the same. You can divide it up into these biogeographic zones. That's work that's been done by Nature Scott and DEFRA. And these are the 46 very distinctive biogeographic zones of the UK. The question surely we should be saying is we want to register where the best wild places are, defined as where nature has most freedom in each one of those areas. And we should celebrate that. Before I finish, I just want to say that it isn't all doom and gloom. When I talked about the books, I said I'd come back to Hannah Ritchie's book. And this is from hers, this isn't my work, but it's just really powerful. So if you think about a definition of sustainability, it's got these two parts. And the one part is the me part. So it's meeting the present needs of people. And the other part is the future for future generations. So if you look at the me part, how are we getting on? So child mortality, significantly down in the world. Mothers dying, life expectancy, under malnutrition, water, sanitation, extreme poverty. All those things have metrics round about them that show positive, much better environment. So we are doing, humanity is doing a great job for the first part of that sustainability vision. On the second part, there are also certain challenges, feed loss. And we're not doing so well on those. But there are positive signs. But the question is, in terms of the global challenge, think about humans spinning in space and so on, is there enough signaling, is there enough happening to get us to actually seriously address that? Or will the political cycles and the short-term thinking always just take us nearly there, but not quite there? This is probably the most instructive graph I'm going to show tonight. This shows how stubborn and stupid people are. This is a graph that simply says that if you don't wear a seatbelt, you will die. And it shows that what happened when they introduced laws to get you to wear a seatbelt, that they had to force us through legal action to wear a seatbelt before we would do it. We didn't do it voluntarily. That dilemma exists in the environment movement, is that the idea that we can stand and we can advocate, and to yourselves, I get the impression that you're all already converts, but the idea that we can speak to people to say, look, we need you to look after the environment. So yeah, that's a good idea, I can understand that. But when they go home, we won't put their seatbelt on. And that's the problem. That's why formally I think we're beginning as a trust to come down to these things need to be formally protected. I want to go back to the deer thing. Remember that, here we are. I just lost a slide. I'm coming to it. So the point I'm making is, remember the deer thing. I'm just going to go straight to the next slide. This slide. These are my friends. Not all alive, but people that I was brought up with. And I'm in that picture, I'm speaking to them on the hill in Africa about the changes that need to take place. Their facial expressions tell you all you need to know what they think about what I'm saying. And Jordy, the guy sitting in the middle, during our shaking together, he managed the team and so on. I created a memorial trophy in his name. Jordy was also a sheep farmer and worked the headage scheme to the best of its ability. And when Jordy was dying, we discussed this a lot, and he just brought home to me the whole point is, yeah, but if you reduce the deer numbers, who is going to pay the salaries of the stalkers? And if you think about deer management in Scotland, which is something dear to my heart, is that it's costing the trust at the moment about £100 to shoot every deer, as it costs us to shoot a deer. Now, we need to shoot them at ever lower and lower numbers to get the habitat to recover. Who's going to pay that? We as a charity can't continue to pay that. That can't be replicated across the country. But having deer in low numbers in the absence of predators is something that we aspire, otherwise we're going to lose the habitat. So who pays? And the only thing that can happen there is that the public purse has to pay, because it's a public benefit. Now, you could say the private estates will pay, and you could go down the land reform argument. And the land reform argument would say, well, if you can't afford to own land in Scotland, don't own it, sell it. So somebody else comes in, and hopefully it's a community buyer, and then they look at it, and then they're saying, well, who's going to pay for the cost of deer control now? It doesn't go away, depending on it's not an issue about who owns the land. It costs money to control deer. The better the habitat, the more money it's going to cost to control deer. So one of the things that's really offensive to these people is that they understand that. They're 2 or 3 steps ahead in the argument all the time. They're saying, you're arguing for something that is our demise. We know that there needs to be more deer stalkers in the future. That's not the issue. We understand the habitat, we understand the welfare. We've got it all. We just need to know who's going to pay the salaries. And that bit is silent just now. And that's why there's so much tension. So whether it's those people or whether it's the people in terms of an increase in the urban-based population in Scotland or in the UK, we need to reach out to them, to talk to them and ask them the question is, do you want to look after wild places in the UK? Is it something you want to protect? And can we get your support to do it? So as I said at the start, we will finish on the discussion and Mike is going to, for the most challenging question, somebody can take home the Thank you.
Thank you very much. Well, it's thought-provoking, and not slightly provocative in places. So I think I've got a stack of questions running around in my head, but I just wonder, does anybody else want to come in initially? But I was struck very early on when you were talking about the rules-based and the need for law and reform of law. The poor have no lawyers, and how actually the law can operate against people as well as for them and disenfranchise them, and the law is most useful for those who've got the means to enact it. I mean, is that something you recognise?
Definitely. When I was younger, much younger, I worked for somebody whose wise words to me were, David, you need to remember that you're a creature of statute. To which my response was, we'll just change the statutes. And that was in the context of protecting wildcats 30 years ago, where the legal protection wasn't there that was needed at the time. But working for a government body, the powers that be just said, well, you can only do what exists in the statute. Whereas as I got older, I began to realise that, and latterly in my career, it was about changing statute. So yeah, the statute is flawed in many ways all the time.
The other, just while people are contemplating it, the other thought I had was you put up a really nice slide with the wild places script over it, and so I assumed that it was a slide of wild place in your head. But I noticed there was a small house or croft in the slide.
Yeah,
So people can live in wild places.
Well, it's interesting. So that the shot you're referring to is taken down looking into the Coollands, and it's come sooner than there's the house there, belongs to Johnson's, where they use as a holiday house in the summertime, and there's a bothy there as well.
Sorry.
Frank should be here
We just know them really well. I'm not here tonight, I don't think.
Yeah. So it's not whether they can or can't, it's that the presence of the house and the track that goes in will affect the wild place index. So it's not a matter of trying to sort of say it's right or wrong, it's just saying that if you've got houses, roads, infrastructure, telephone masts, just be aware that all these things are reducing the wild place quality.
But you're not going to be such a purist that you would say it has to be an exclusion zone around the. I mean, because I thought the area that you had in Coventry, which I thought was really interesting and very compelling, because you can't create those sorts of environments in urban areas, then we're doomed, essentially, on many levels. So I think that's a really interesting challenge that you're setting for yourself. And it clearly will be a huge human impact on a wild place within a populated setting.
I think anybody who's familiar with Chernobyl and the after impacts and the sort of how the ecology is taking Chernobyl back over is aware that, you know, no matter what we do to the environment, it has an amazing ability, if you let it go free, to recover some of those things, albeit that it takes time.
Yeah, good.
I recognise that the Trust has been going through a very difficult period the last couple of years. And I just wondered what difference you had to make 19 or 20 people redundant. What have you stopped doing as a result of that? And what's your prognosis about the future health of the Trust? I speak as a life member of 20 or 30 years standing.
Yeah. So thank you for the question. I guess I genuinely mean that. I think it's the sort of thing that we should be speaking about openly. So the big answer is prognosis for the Trust is very good. So in terms of the financial crisis that the Trust went through, we've got back to now managing our cloth, if you like. In terms of, I think there's a few things that and it's not to pick on anything, but one of the things that we had to reduce doing for a while was the John Muir Award. And one of the reasons for that is that sometimes you get in a situation where you're supporting and financing an award, and it could be that award is for everybody in the UK, and that's what we would like to happen. But if that's being funded from what's called unrestricted funds in the Trust, and you don't control how many awards you're getting out, all of a sudden you find all the money that we've got is going into that, and it's a financially unsustainable type approach. The good news is that Wendy, who's here tonight, has been leading on bringing all that back into a financially sustainable model. And in the next edition, I think, of the Trust Journal, we'll be announcing the launch of the new award, as it were, and that's much safer. But there's other things that we're doing is that another thing that happens in the charity sector is that you get funding for posts for a short period of time. When you take those people on as permanent staff, the funding comes to an end, can you keep the staff? So you all of a sudden find out that you're paying salaries and you can't afford the staff. So we had to reduce numbers, and it was deeply painful. And one of the lessons learned is that as we go forward, we might use more fixed term contracts. So it's really clear to the employee coming in that we can afford to employ them for that period of time. We might, in certain circumstances, use more contractors with special skills in certain areas. But we are seeking to build, and have built with recent appointments, a very experienced and competent group of people in the core. And an example of that, in terms of Trust commitment to making change, is our most recent appointment. So David Fleetwood, who's now our Director of Policy, has been the Special Advisor to the last 3 First Ministers of Scotland. So the Trust is absolutely committed to delivering for wild places in the UK. The other point I'd make is that we've had to go through the Trust strategy to get back to the point of the spear thing and say that we need to make sure that everything that we're doing is focused on having the right impact in the most cost-effective way. So painful as it has been, it feels now that the Trust is poised as a very professional organisation to deliver at the highest levels.
Again, on a practical level about the Trust itself, I'm interested in how you manage visitor pressure on your wild places, and particularly camper vans, for instance. Have you closed your car parks to them? Those of us who live near here will have long garden in mind. And I just wonder what your approach to things like with the pressure from camper vans is.
Yeah.
Do you have a camper van?
Would you
I don't a camper van. I've never seen a camper van, but both my sons are, what do you call it, have done quite a lot of them.
Van.
Well, they're just the climbers, so they,
That's right.
one of them still, yeah. The trust's approach generally is to be open and welcoming and inclusive, and we cope with the problem and the burden that creates. We have different localised problems. So if you go back up to Shegra, there's been a problem there where the camper vans have been going down onto the Macha and destroying the SECs, especially the conservation, trampling the ground. We've had to remove the right of access, but that's vehicle access onto a very sensitive habitat that legally was never there, but was just taken as a sort of a right, as it were. And interestingly, when we thought we would close the gate and chain it, we felt that we might have problems with people in taking in paddocks and bolt cutters to cut the paddock. We haven't. People have been very respectful. In terms of probably the highest pressure for us is in the Blackman car park where we had a composting toilet, and that's quite difficult when people put their chemical waste down and then it destroys the composting process. So we've got a capacity issue there, and there we're having to move this year from composting to septic tank type disposal. Probably the other bit though, it's worth mentioning since speaking about the talk, is that if you go back to Strathayard, which used to be a farm, and there's another area at Fulham, just outside of Lochslarthen, where we did a consultation with the community as to what might be ways that those areas could be used going forward to bring about benefit for the community and help us look after our places. And one of the things that's high on there was making specific provision for camper vans. So we're looking at it in different ways in different areas, but generally speaking, I think that the trust will hold very, very dear the access rights. So providing you keep your motor vehicle in areas where it's authorised to go, we'll do our best to try and accommodate what we're going to have.
Well, is there an inbuilt tension or conflict between wanting to create wild spaces but also wanting to liberate them, so the whole notion of equity that you put up there, so people can get access to them and use them and enjoy them. So the more people that do that, the greater the threat on those wild places.
Yeah. We'll discuss, I don't know how many people know the bad step on the walk from Elbow around to. So the question there is, should we take on the liability issues and repair that and put in some sort of vehicle access system or whatever to make that safer for people? Yeah. But then you go the bad step. Yeah. So that's the bad step, and then you go steel doors, and then you say, right, so you've got various people who've had various things accidents there recently, so we'll put in a balustrade to help them get across the slippery rocks and that. And it's a very, there's lots of grey areas in there, I completely support where you're at. And the minute you start investing and saying it's now safe for you to go, you've taken on a lot of pain and liability.
You have to do it everywhere for everything, and you just can't do that. If someone will find another bit, they're incompetent or incapable.
Sure. Well, I was interviewed before, we were talking about Sandwood there, so you were saying that you've got a lot of pressure on trying to improve the path from where the cars currently have to park to the bay of 4 miles or so away. And people want you to get closer to it so they can get to the bay in a couple of hours and get on their way on the 500 route.
Yeah. So of course, the pressure Sandwood Bay is that it's only 4.5 miles in the walk. I took the boys there in their motors baskets when they were born. And it was quite muddy and Pete was quite wide and so on, and since then the trust has done a lot to navigate. So the visual scarring of that path is far less because we've invested in it, or the trust has invested in it. But then there are a couple of burns you go across where there's stepping stones that are raised out of the water. To my mind, beautifully done. But we get letters every year saying it's ridiculous, we're far too dangerous, and we should put a bridge in, and that the bars so people get to that. It's where you draw the line. E-bikes is another one, is that now people are flying in and out of Sandwood path on e-bikes. What's the difference of an e-bike and a motorised vehicle? Not a lot if you're pedestrian walking. The time distance now to get your Instagram picture on an electric bike is not very long. So you've got zoom, back and forth, Instagram picture. And it affects everything. It affects the experience when people walk in, your experience on the beach, because it's a different type of person, because that remoteness is something that protected a quality of wildness that you lose if people are just turning up and moving around in electric bikes.
It says there's something about a truly wild place, you have to earn it, you have to work, you have to put some effort in to get there, or if you can just drive up, jump out of the car and take a photo, it's not a wild place.
That's only if you can do it. Yes, if you can.
I think
Ability issues, you know?
Yeah, but I think that's where the index comes in, so that if you get elitist about it, you will turn off an awful lot of people.
Yeah.
And it's not about being elitist, it's about saying you can provide an index as to the quality of the wild place and what scores it high. And it might be accessibility gives it a score that nudges it up. It might be that because it used to be at this score, somebody went and put in stainless steel bolts all the way up a cliff, that you sort of think, well, actually, it's not as remote as wild as I thought it was, because now there's some infrastructure there. But it's not for us to claim where the wild places are. It's to be able to explain what the qualities are, measure them, and if you, through that, empowering people to value them, because
This intellectual discussion is all very interesting. There is no money. The country is broke. 40% of national nature reserves are in poor and declining condition because of long-term continued cuts from the government. There is no money in public funds. What steps are you taking with your experience in public sector to persuade the politicians and the Treasury purse holders to change that emphasis?
that's an excellent question. So the first experience is I used to get a job where I advised ministers. And I go into a room with a wad of paper to brief a minister on a meeting that he's about to go to. And we'd be looking at risk assessment, threats, and how his responses, lines to take. And in that package, there's the lines, minister, that you'll take last, and there's the ones that you will take if pushed. And more frequently than not, the question back is, who's this John Muir Trust? How many members have they got? Well, they've only got 10,000, 12,000 members. What's RSPB saying about it? They've got a lot more members. Unless we can get membership up and inspire people to advocate for wild places, then we don't stand a chance. Because you're right, that in terms of the spending round review, it's so pressurised. I have a picture up there, which I didn't use it tonight, but it's about the number of children in the UK that are living in poverty. It's horrific. So never mind nature reserves, the money, the public money has to go somewhere. And we've got to argue against whether it's defence or healthcare or poverty or whatever. But you've got to have a really good argument. Now, at the moment, the environment sector is very divided. There are lots of different little NGOs doing lots of things. But are they effective in creating the point of that sphere to argue the hard-nosed economics that you're referring to? Not a chance, not at the moment. And that's what we've got to coalesce around.
But what's going to change is Mr. Trump and the consequence and the downfall of his very direct action. This is where people like yourself, working together with other agencies, need to put a very clear focus. Otherwise, what you're saying is all very intellectually very correct. It won't happen.
That clear focus is exactly why I spent time covering that sphere. And it was back to Gentleman's question about the future of the trust. Be under no doubt about our commitment and focus to achieving those outcomes.
We wish you well.
And a similar question I was going to ask, do you find it counterproductive when politicians make grand announcements? We're going to spend 20 billion on this or that eco thing, because people don't trust voices of authority perhaps as much as they once did. And if they start to look at that and say, I'm struggling to make ends meet, that money would be much better in the health service or in whatever. So, I mean, I know that they're all well intentioned, but do you sometimes sit there and say, I really wish you hadn't said that, because that's actually set the cause back in people's minds, even if it's a well intentioned project? You can just say yes or no.
No. So, yeah, I mean, I cringe many a time in terms of when politicians have said things or they've announced things, and you see that they are playing a political game. It's politics for a reason. Their jobs aren't easy. I'm not going to stand here and criticise politicians, because what they have to balance is incredibly difficult. At the core of their decision making is, will they get back into power? And they'll get back into power if the people vote for them. So if they're making decisions that the people want them to make, they'll get back into power. So our job is to make sure that people really care about our places. The problem at the moment is that you go back to the slide about how wild is used in the commercial thing. Cosmetics are wild, everything's wild. Is that is very dangerous for us, because it's devalued the concept of a wild place. And we've got to win back that territory, and we can do it with a wild place in there. And Wendy here's director of our comms, but one of the things that Wendy leads on is our engagement tools, and looking at how we marshal the arguments I'm giving you tonight are sort of hot off the press. But these are the arguments that we'll be rolling out in the coming months to members and to a much wider audience to say, look, we've got to start generating energy in this space.
Thank you.
Okay, any further questions? Yes.
Changing a bit, going back to your slide about the seatbelt usage, that shows that good regulations can achieve positive results, and hopefully at some stage the same will happen with wild places. But do you see any mechanism for extending that much more widely? Seatbelt rules only apply to the UK. For wild spaces, it needs to apply to the whole world. What sort of mechanism do you envisage to achieve that?
Give him the scale.
I don't think that those mechanisms are within our ability to think about just now. If you think about the globe's working, there, in terms of the oceans, countries are beginning to come together to form treaties that manage the oceans. Antarctica has similar treaties. If you think about space, they're thinking about how they can work collectively to manage space. I can't see, until you deal with the equity and the tribalism issues, how you're going to be able to enforce the rule of law at a global level.
That's less pessimistic than I thought you might have.
Presumably there are John Muir Trust equivalents in many other countries, and there are lots of initiatives, and there is a drive, even if it's not at government level, at community levels, in many parts of the world, aren't there? So,
behind the question was, how do I control Donald Trump?
yeah, well,
But is there a chance of trying to balance that imbalance between commercial lobbyists that are talking to the ministers to a collective of organisations like yourselves? It just feels to me that the commercial lobbyists are just out of sight right now.
Yeah, so I agree with that, but it's in that space. I think the challenge is, even to the commercial lobbyists, is if you had them in this room and you said to them, do you not think the UK should have any wild places? Are you willing to go on record and say, no, we don't want any wild places in the UK? I don't think we'll go on record and say that. That's the chink in the door. That's the bit that we've got to leverage off, because I've never met anybody that is willing to stand up and say, I don't believe there should be any places in the UK where nature's got freedom to thrive. And you just think, well, okay, so if you're willing to make that statement, what then follows? And we just start small and say, right, okay, so does that mean that the only places are in the northwest, or can we have them in the 46 biogeographic zones of the UK? And again, people say yes to that. So slowly you're building a logic, and it gets up, it'll come up to the NIMBY problem, is when it gets down to a parcel of land. And we go, yeah, great idea, but not quite there, mate, because that's where I'm going to make my money. Yeah, and that's where you need to regulate the environment to say, well, in perpetuity those areas and then designate.
Unfortunately, they've got a ringleader just been voted in across the water.
Okay, yes, just.
Just one last question.
Yeah.
I recently heard quite a lot of people starting to talk about the fact that often when we as people talk about nature, it's as if we're not part of nature and that we are something else. And I think, having listened to you speak tonight, that when I would have thought about John Muir Trust before I came here tonight, I would have been thinking that the John Muir Trust might actually fall foul of that itself, that they often talk about wild places and the human impact on that place is an issue, whether it's a problem or not, it's a feature, it's something to be thought about. And I'm just wondering if, as you talk about having more kind of foothold in lots of different types of contexts and communities, whether you also might need to specifically address this issue of humanity being part of nature or something apart, whether that might be something that could start to make a significant difference in the way in which you engage with lots of humans.
I think it could be, and the bit I sort of back to there is that remember there's different ways that humans can engage. So you've got the hunter-gatherer mode, and you've got the farming mode, and you can polarise those into extremes. It doesn't need to be all intensive language or our engagement with the land can be. And I think it's not about us. It's not about. It goes back to the things that you won't get societal change unless the people want it to happen. So we need to argue for that. And I do believe that most people would like to see areas where nature has more freedom than it's got just now. There's plenty of areas where land's managed. There's very few areas where, in the UK, we can go and say that is a natural process that's been allowed to go through natural succession. So I think we will do ourselves a very good service to connect with people in communities. I showed a picture there of a Welsh hill farmer, Rapid Jones. He was passionate about the Welsh hills, absolutely passionate. He's farmed them all his life. He's probably as good a custodian of that land as you can get, given his geographic and social circumstances. He's not against it. He's so proud of the Welsh environment that you can build on that and find out, well, Darren, what is the future for Wales in terms of nature's freedom? And it doesn't take long speaking to him before he too will start saying, well, actually, see where you're coming from, there may be our areas. Let's start that conversation. But if you try and criticise, he will form a tribe very quickly. And you're going back to Carlisle.
Okay, that's got a positive and helpful note to finish on. So thank you so much. I mean, we've got to identify the most challenging question. I don't know if you have one that you've got now.
I think that the gentleman who's the last member, yes.
Yeah, I thought the one question was perhaps like as it drew out from you and your sort of prospects for the future. So you are the proud recipient of the. So congratulations, but also thank you all for being such a good and attentive audience, but particularly David for holding our attention and engaging in a really thought-provoking evening. So thank you so much for that. That's been wonderful. Now, before people get on and go, can I just a couple of things to say. Firstly, we're back here in a fortnight with RSPB talking about 70 years since the osprey were rediscovering Loch Garth. And so there's a huge story and a really good positive story to tell about the osprey and how it's consolidated around here but spread across the whole of the UK. I mean, what a good story that would be. So please do come and join us. We'll have 3 speakers to tell that story. But also, for those of you who are around nothing on Saturday night, in the hall here, Cameron McNeish will be here with a film and talking about I don't know what we'll be talking about. Yeah, we're talking about Scotland, the hills, the life, and
It's home and away.
home and away. Okay.
So the first half is all about Scotland and all the work we've done. And the second half will be about all over and the rest of the
The rest of the world. Okay, there's a right balance, isn't there? Half the time on Scotland, half the time on the rest of the world. So that would be a really good evening, and I think there's gin tasting between the two halves. So you'll probably enjoy the second half more than the first. So please do come along. That tickets on the door, Nick?
Yeah.
Yeah. So tickets available on the door on Saturday night. Hopefully you can all come on fortnight's time. That would be our penultimate talk after 21 years. So do come along and enjoy that. If you have cups, it would be really good if you could take them back outside on the way out. And if you feel inclined to stack a few chairs, that would be wonderful. But thank you all for coming, and thank you, David.